Can a team that aspires to the Formula One title win if you admit that you should run with the handbrake on your hand? Ferrari has just accepted something that could mark the fate of his entire season. Was the fight for Maranello's fight? Ferrari has done something that has rarely seen in Formula One modern. Admit publicly and bluntly that its car of the 2025 season has such a serious structural defect that they have had to radically modify their competitive approach. This apparently technical admission actually represents a dramatic turn in its sports narrative. What seemed like a simple precautionary measure is, in essence, the acceptance that the car is not up to championship expectations. And that statement, coming from a team with Ferrari's legacy, is not less. The time chosen to communicate this decision was not casual either. It occurs just after the summer break, when all teams are preparing the second half of the championship, refining every technical detail for the final sprint. However, while their rivals evolve and optimize, Ferrari opts contrary: stop, contain, limit. And not by strategy but by necessity. What triggered this internal crisis was an isolated event: the disqualification of Lewis Hamilton in the Chinese Grand Prix, when excessive wear in the wooden plate of his car. This component, mandatory under technical regulation, serves as an indicator that the car has not touched the ground in excess. And when we wear beyond the allowed limit, the FIA considers it an automatic infraction. The worrying thing is that this wear was not the result of a punctual error, nor a bad management of the weekend setup. According to Fred Vasseur himself, it was a direct consequence of how the car is designed. And that, in Formula One, is a devastating verdict. You cannot correct a design with a conversation between engineers. You cannot cover a structural failure with minor changes on the track. It's like discovering that the engine of a plane is badly calibrated just before taking off. You can fly slower, yes, but you know that the problem is still there, and that every flying kilometer is a bet. Since then, Ferrari has implemented a security margin in the car height. This means that SF25 must now raise a few more than ideal. A change that, although guarantees the technical legality of the car, also destroys its competitiveness. In Formula One, an extra millimeter is not just an adjustment. It is a world of difference. It affects aerodynamic load, dynamic balance, tire wear, and above all, pilot's confidence. In the words of Vasseur, these cars are extremely sensitive when it comes to the height of the ground. Each millimeter represents a position on the grille. This raises a fundamental question: how did Ferrari reach this point? How is it possible that a team with its resources, experience, and history build a car that cannot use the regulation to the fullest? That is the true tragedy behind this confession. It is not just an adjustment problem. It is a sign that the Scuderia has lost something more valuable than speed: technical certainty. This reality becomes even more serious if we observe the context of the championship. While McLaren dominates with technical confidence and Mercedes finds his form, Ferrari is forced to contain his performance to comply with the regulation. Not for fear, but because the design of the SF25 itself does not leave them another option. One thing is that a Formula One car is not the fastest. Another very different is that, by design, the car is incapacitated to function within its ideal performance window. And that is exactly what is happening with the Ferrari SF25. From the outside, Ferrari's car seemed like a bold step towards a new conceptual direction. In fact, the season started with optimism after an intense work winter. Ferrari implemented a radical change in the architecture of his car, a pull rod-type suspension system both in the front and rear axle. This technical choice was ambitious, even innovative, and sought to replicate the success of solutions used by Red Bull in previous years. But what seemed like a logical evolution quickly became a technical trap. Pull rod suspension is known for allowing a lower center of gravity and better aerodynamic flow management on the bottom of the car. However, this design is also more complex to configure and requires impeccable structural rigidity to work properly. Ferrari, in its eagerness for innovation, combined this design with a rear configuration that has turned out to be too flexible under load. That lack of rigidity translates into a vertical oscillation of the car when it comes into contact with asphalt at extreme speeds. In other words, the car melts against the ground more than expected, which causes accelerated wear of the wooden plate, the block that regulates the minimum height of the vehicle in accordance with the FIA regulations. And when this component is wearing more than allowed, the car is automatically disqualified. What has lived by Hamilton in China was only the tip of the iceberg. Even more alarming is the fact that this problem directly affects the SF25 performance key, the soil effect. The aerodynamics of the car is designed to operate at a very low height. The closer to the ground, the more efficient the generation of aerodynamic load by diffuser and venturi channels. But the SF25 cannot run as low as it needs. If you do, risk sanctions. If you do not, you lose performance. A dead-end alley. The temporary solution that Ferrari has adopted, raising the filming height, compromises aerodynamic flow, affects the stability in rapid curve, and completely modifies the distribution of pesos of the car. This generates subviring in slow curves, instability when braking, and overheating rear tires. That is, a car that on paper was a lethal weapon must now compete with self-imposed restrictions that directly limit their basic benefits. This is especially noticeable in classification. Charles Leclerc has been clear. There are sessions in which the car does not respond. It is not a matter of lack of talent, but of mechanical unpredictability. The SF25 can be very fast to return, and completely uncontrollable the next. That inconsistency is killing the confidence of the pilots, who are forced to constantly improvise themselves to stay competitive. Lewis Hamilton, who arrived in Ferrari with a mixture of illusion and ambition, has already experienced firsthand how volatile this car is. Despite his ability to adapt, the British cannot display his full potential because the car simply does not give him the necessary tools. And in Formula One, there is no pilot who saves a car that cannot run inside his own technical comfort zone. This situation converts every race weekend into a kind of technical roulette for Ferrari. Sometimes the car enters temperature, finds the right rebound, the winds do not bother, and the rhythm appears. But a small alteration is enough for the SF25 to crumble, especially in bacheloring paths or with high-speed curves, where the bottom of the car touches more than allowed. In summary, the diagnosis of SF25 is overwhelming. It is a technically promising car, but condemned by an architecture that does not support its own ambition. Ferrari wanted to be innovative, and has paid the price. It is not a bad setting but a concept error. And the worst part is that there is no real margin to change it in the middle of the season. The question that begins to float in Maranello is not whether they can win races, but if they can complete the next ones without being sanctioned again. That is the magnitude of the problem. Ferrari's confession not only exposes technical vulnerability, but completely redefines its strategic approach for the rest of the season. When a team declares that it must limit its performance for fear of disqualifications, what you are really admitting is that it no longer controls its sport's destination. From that point, everything that is planned is reactive, not proactive. Fred Vasseur knows it. Therefore, Ferrari has opted for what could be defined as a technical containment strategy. This consists in stabilizing the performance of the SF25 within a safer but less competitive range in order to avoid critical errors, minimize sanction risks, and above all, preserve the morals of the team. The priority now is not to win every weekend, but to avoid another debacle such as China. The approach becomes resistance, not attack. This has direct repercussions on dynamics among pilots. Charles Leclerc, by nature an explosive pilot who feels more comfortable to the limit, is being forced to moderate his style. You cannot attack pianos as before, or look for those additional tenths that normally distinguish it in classification. Instead, surgical precision, patience, and care is required, necessary qualities but contrary to your natural instinct. On the other side is Lewis Hamilton. His arrival to Ferrari was one of the most media movements in years, and for many, the beginning of a new era. However, the SF25 has not lived up to the legend that leads it. Although Hamilton has shown moments of brilliance such as his pole and sprint classification in China, it has also been clear that he has not yet found a full connection with the car. And the most frustrating thing is that this connection could never get if the car is still limited by its own conceptual failures. This context raises an awkward question for Ferrari. Is it worth developing a car with structural problems, or is it time to look at 2026? The answer is not simple. Technically, redesign a chassis or a suspension in full season is almost impossible by regulations and homologation times. The improvements that Ferrari can introduce from now on will be minor evolutions, aimed at slightly expanding the operational window or correcting certain consequences of the problem of height, but not its root. This leaves Ferrari in a deeply uncomfortable position. He has two champions behind the wheel, a factory full of technical talent, and the emotional support of millions of fans worldwide. And yet, he has to look sideways at the regulation before pushing to the fullest. You have to settle for less, not because you want, but because your car can't give more. The challenge is not alone on the track. It is in leadership, in the ability to make uncomfortable decisions, in redirect resources, rethink priorities, and start building, not from immediate performance, but from technical truth. That truth that they now know that hurts them. but that, if they face it clearly, can mark the beginning of a new stage. This is the real message that Ferrari leaves us. It is not only about the ground height, the wooden plate, or the soil effect. It's what you do as a team when you know your car is not enough, and if you make it an excuse or a lesson that transforms your future.